Welcome to the Creative Penn podcast. I'm Joanna Penn, thriller author and creative entrepreneur, bringing you interviews, inspiration and information on writing, publishing options and marketing ideas for your book. You can find the episode show notes, your free author blueprint and lots more information at thecreativepenn.com, and that's Penn with a double N. And here's the show. Hello creatives, I'm Joanna Penn, and this is episode number 573 of the podcast, and it is Friday the 10th of September 2021 as I record this. In today's show, I'm talking about travel writing with Jeremy Bassetti, who is the host of the Travel Writing World podcast. We met at Podcast Movement a few years back, and there's a picture on the show notes, and we geek out about all the different kinds of travel writing, from memoir to big ideas to travel logs and guidebooks. And this was one of those interviews, and I did it obviously a few weeks ago now, and I thought about a lot afterwards, and it's helped me make some decisions about my own writing, which I'll talk about in the personal section in a minute. So this interview is also about discovering what we really want to write, especially when we're already cross-genre writers, and recognising and tackling imposter syndrome, which Jeremy and I definitely suffer from in this area. So that's coming up in the interview. Nothing too interesting in publishing and book marketing this week, so I'm going to go straight into my personal update because I posted my annual lessons learned this week on the blog, as it has been 10 years of being an author entrepreneur. Yes, I left my job as an IT consultant back in September 2011. It's just crazy to think that, and I'm not going to read the whole blog post here. You can read the details, links in the show notes, but I do have 3 lessons which I will briefly talk about. So my first one is, when you get bored or things feel stale, hang on a bit longer. Things will change and you will too. So as I've talked about on the show, I was pretty, bored with the whole write, publish, repeat model. I like change, and obviously the pandemic was more change than we all expected, but I've definitely this year I've been doing a lot of the in-between episodes, and I've been getting into the technological shifts. In the last year, my attitude has changed quite a lot. If you listen to the AI posts in 2020, before Christmas, my attitude is quite different now. And I am actually working on a creating with AI mini course, so that will come up at some point. But the technological shifts, as I said, I'm aiming to do an NFT in the next couple of months. So I feel like I've been trying to embrace the new emerging technologies and the ways we can do things. Yes, I want to write, publish, repeat and continue the ongoing creative entrepreneur life, but I'm writing different things. I want to publish in different ways and use different technologies. So yeah, I'm reinvigorated for my next decade. So don't worry. I was feeling like, it's just the same again and again. And now I'm not, which is good. So yeah, things will change and you change too. And sort of tapping into the new stuff you want to write and create and experience and try out. These are all part of being, a more long-term creative. My second lesson, you can keep a mature author business going with just a few consistent actions. And this has been very, very good to realise in these difficult times. I mean, last year in 2020, I wrote that the global scalable digital business model is very good for a pandemic, and this year has been much the same, but this year has been much harder for me mentally and physically, to be honest. I had a very difficult first lockdown of 2021. The winter lockdown in January, February, March 2021 was pretty killer for me, to be honest. And then, of course, I got COVID in the summer, in July, and so I've had these episodes of not being able to do much, but my business has continued, and I can pull these different levers in the business to make income when I'm not able to work. And I do things like I batch these episodes, and there's lots of things that I can do to move things around. And there's only a few things I need to do consistently. Obviously writing, but I'm only going to put out a couple of books this year, so much less than I did last year. But podcasting, obviously I've been pretty consistent at podcasting, to be honest. And email, I've been consistent with email, and a minimal amount of paid ads, most of which you can either outsource or schedule in advance. So I've cut back so much in the last year that has freed up more time for the other things that I was talking about: passion projects, learning new stuff, doing the in-between episodes, things that might not make money right now, but will make money in the future. So yeah, really interesting. Also, direct sales have been super useful for making money while I've been struggling, because all I really have to do is send out an email with a 50% coupon, and all of you wonderful people who buy direct, either from my courses or my books or my audiobooks, I get that money much faster than I do through the various other stores, and I can make a higher profit. So yeah, I feel like the mature author business, when you've got lots of books, lots of products, it does work. And if you're wondering, this is never going to work for me, or you're only in the early years, please know that things get easier over time. And in fact, on the Ask Ally podcast with me and Orna Ross this week, we talked about this development from the startup business to the mature author business, and how the different challenges emerge at different stages. And once you're at the stage I guess I am now, a decade of full time, and of course pretty much 5 years before that of writings, 2016 was realistically when 2006 when I actually started writing with the aim of doing this professionally, that 15 years. So yeah, which is just weird. Time is so strange with the pandemic, don't you think? It feels like it's speeded up but also slowed down. We seem like we've been in it forever. Anyway, so yes, hopefully that encourages you that you can keep a mature author business going with just a few things. And then my third lesson is you don't have to grow your business. Yes, I still have ambition, and there are days when I want to win all the awards and I want to make my 7 figures a year and all of this stuff. But let's face it, taking your foot off the pedal rather than pushing it down on the accelerator has been increasingly important in these pandemic times. And Jonathan going back to his job, I really enjoy being a solopreneur again. This is my business. I love the freedom to create what I want, when I want, or not, because I'm broken in some way. I like being a not very well-known multi-6-figure author, as discussed with Patricia McClinn in episode 552. The not very well-known multi-6-figure author can just get on with things and doesn't have to deal with a lot of the hassle that the very well-known authors do. I also have these projects that I want to work on that might not make money now, may never do, but I want to do them anyway. So yes, you don't have to keep growing, and the pressure to keep growing is what breaks a lot of companies. So yeah, wherever you are on the author journey, do you really have to grow? Do you really have to push it? Maybe you just need to let it be and continue on a path this year without having to go uphill. That was my metaphor. So that is on the blog as a post, or you can go to thecreativepenn.com/timeline and see everything since 2008 when I started blogging. I've been sharing these types of lessons learned, so that might help. Right, so just coming back to my thoughts on this discussion with Jeremy that's coming up, it actually helped me come to a similar realisation as the discussion with Tom Evans did for fiction over a decade ago. And you can hear that clip in episode 500, where I go through significant moments on the show. So when I do episode 1000, if I get there, this discussion with Jeremy might well be in the episode, because I've been building up this idea of a travel memoir in my mind as one perfect thing, the perfect book that I'll work on, and it'll encapsulate the important aspects of my past and my thoughts on travel and the Camino, and it's deep and meaningful, and it's all the things. And that is way too much pressure to put on a single book. It really is. It's like, oh, this perfect thing. And it was just too much. The other thing is that we write what we love to read. And through the pandemic, and especially during my days in bed with COVID, I couldn't read as it was too tiring, like too much brain power to actually look at something. But I listened to a lot of audiobooks, and what I craved and listened to a lot of were these travel logs, the step-by-step journey of someone moving across the face of the earth in some way, usually walking, because I like walking. I didn't want the deep and meaningful recovery from tremendous suffering. I just wanted to be with someone as they moved across the world. And there's a place for the tremendous suffering to recovery memoirs, but I just wanted travel books about places where I could imagine myself walking alongside the person. And I started writing escapist international thrillers because that's what I craved when I was a miserable IT consultant. And so I will write some travel logs because I understand the need for those books, and that's what I've been craving. There will be deep and meaningful aspects coming through, as there are in my fiction, if you read between the lines, or the musings of Morgan Sierra, obviously my musings, but they don't all have to be in one mega book. And this is, I don't know why I have to keep learning this lesson, but it seems like I do. So I thought if I had to learn it again, maybe you have to learn it again. So the question is, what are you building up in your head into this one perfect future book that someday you will write and it will be the pinnacle of whatever? Maybe that's too much pressure. Maybe you should do what we talk about and this kind of practice idea. So I've started, and when I say practice, I don't mean the book isn't great. You still do a fantastic book, but it doesn't have to be everything. It can be something smaller. So I have started typing up my notes from the Pilgrim's Way that I walked last October. I wrote a journal every day. I took a lot of photos, so I'm going to do that one first. On the emotional, deep and meaningful side, that might be my pandemic reflections, because it was in a break between lockdowns. I have fears about illness. I have fears about, it was my first solo multi-day walk, and lots of other things that went on that trip. So, and I talked about some of that in my solo show on books and travel. It's called This Too Shall Pass. But I feel like a travel log is different. A travel book is the day-by-day journey as well as the reflections. I'll be doing the St. Cuthbert's Way next month, so that will be the second book. So I'm kind of planning the Pilgrim's Way, then the Cuthbert's Way, and then my Camino memoir, or maybe the Camino will be a separate book and then my memoir will be different. I don't know, but I feel like I've taken the pressure off. I feel so much happier. I feel like the dam has now broken around my travel writing. And those of you who follow Books and Travel, my other podcast, will know that I kind of talk about these things during the shows. And I'm kind of I've been working up to this for ages, but now I feel like perhaps the dam has broken. So there you go. One of the other practice pieces on Books and Travel this week was another solo show, London, A Personal History, which goes through the 3 phases of my relationship with London and some of my favourite places. So you can find that on the Books and Travel podcast. On the fiction side, I'm just about finished the draft of Tomb of Relics, just cycling through the last chapters, intensifying it. I had in mind what was going to happen, but as ever, discovery writer, things are changing. So that's fun. As this goes out, it will be resting for a week as we're having a little walking break in the Wye Valley, which is just a couple of hours away. It's way too much hassle to try and go anywhere else at the moment as these weird times continue. So pictures on Instagram and Facebook at JF Penn Author if you want to see what it's like. I'll also be going to Hereford Cathedral to see the Mappa Mundi. And if you've read Map of Shadows, you'll know how very cool that is. Although presumably I won't be travelling through it to another realm. And of course, The Relaxed Author is almost here, out on 18th of September. So Mark Leslie Lefebvre and I are in the finishing energy for that. We've been uploading files and things and doing all the bits and bobs. And we have an episode coming soon on how we co-wrote the book, because it's definitely different to how either of us have done it before. So thanks for your emails and tweets and comments this week. There were so many of you who loved Becca's interview on strengths, which is fantastic. And there were literally I've had so many comments and tweets and emails and YouTube comments. I think it had the most YouTube comments I've had in ages. So thank you to everyone who has left a comment. I'm so glad it resonated. Michael Yoder on YouTube said, "This was a breath of fresh air and a chance for me to sigh. Becca really understands. I've heard other writers that you've interviewed say they write 2,000 words a day. That's good for that person, but I'm happy sometimes if I can manage one small scene that says what I really want to say." Thanks for this interview. Vivian Worden just left a tiny comment. She said, "Needed this." Which I think a lot of people felt when they listened to it. Thanks also to Lizbeth, who sent a lovely smiley picture of her out walking during one of the last times at my home of more than 50 years in Anchorage, Alaska. I'm moving my writing and my own podcast to Chattanooga, Tennessee. That Chattanooga is one of those famous places that everyone's heard of because of the song. But that's a hell of a move from Alaska to Tennessee. I think you're going to need a new wardrobe, Lizbeth. But, she says, for a much needed gap year that I forgot to take in my late teens. I hope your business plan includes 50 more years of the Creative Penn. I don't know about 50 years because I'm 46, so I'm not sure I'll still be podcasting when I'm 96, but never say never. And finally, Emily Robertson said, "This one was so great, and in the proof that you always say podcasts sell books, I immediately bought Becca's book." Indeed, podcasts do sell books. Lots of proof of that for sure. So you can leave a comment on the show notes, or you can always go to thecreativepenn.com/podcast and find the latest episode. You can also tweet me at The Creative Penn with a picture of where you're listening in these times where I have not been anywhere for so long. I like seeing where you are. So send me your view or picture of you out and about. Or you can leave a comment on YouTube if you listen there. And as always, I love to hear what you think about the show. So today's show is sponsored by Draft Digital, and I'll play a word from Kevin Tumlinson in a minute. Personally, I use Draft Digital for publishing to library services, to Nook and to other ebook platforms, and also for their ebook payment splitting with the Relaxed Author, which makes it very easy to split the payments if you're co-writing. I also love their books to read URLs for easy to share wide links. If you publish wide, it's super useful, so make sure to set yours up at books2read.com. And you don't have to use Draft Digital to use that free service. So this type of corporate sponsorship pays for the hosting, transcription and editing, but my time in creating the show is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. Thanks to new and returning patrons in the last week. And thanks particularly to Aurora Winter, Mary Ann Hill, Kerry Stevens, Charles Mann and Gillian Price. And thanks to everyone supporting the show on Patreon for months and years now. You guys are amazing. And of course, I sent out special coupon this week to my Patreon supporters with 50% off. So if you are including the latest book, The Relaxed Author. So if you are a patron, you get money off things, and you also get the monthly Q&A audio. So if you want to support the show with a couple of dollars or pounds or euros or Canadian dollars a month, you can support the show at patreon.com, patreon.com/The Creative Penn. Right, here's a word from Draft Digital, and then we'll get into the interview.
Hey, this is Kevin Tumlinson with Draft Digital. So if you've ever co-authored a book or tried to build a box set, you know the biggest pain is how to split up the royalties. That's why we at Draft Digital have built D2D payment splitting. We've made it easy for you to share payments with other collaborators on your projects in whatever percentages you prefer. Right from the setup of your book, you can invite participants, agree on who gets paid what, and go. D2D takes care of all those pesky details like tax interviews and making sure everyone gets paid on time. And of course, you continue to own the rights to your work. So, get started on your collaborative project now at draftdigital.com. We've made it easy for you. See you there.
Jeremy Bassetti is a travel writer, editor, teacher, and author of historical fiction. He's the host of 2 podcasts, Travel Writing World and Sonus Loci, The Sound of Place. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here, Jo.
Oh, I'm excited to talk to you. So first up, tell us a bit more about you and how you got into writing.
Well, I'm a teacher and I've been doing academic research and writing for literally half of my life since university. My plan was always to turn my attention to creative writing, to creative nonfiction when I finished grad school. I always said that I didn't want to be a secondary source, I wanted to be a primary source. I wanted to create the type of things that I was studying. But anyway, so that's what I did around 2015. I was studying and researching about the business and craft of writing on my free time. And that's when I found your podcast. So I dabbled a little bit in self-publishing. I published a book, Denounced. It's a historical fiction set in Seville in Renaissance Spain. And what I'm really interested in now is travel literature, because I found out during the writing process of my historical fiction, I was drawing on a lot of my personal experiences living in Spain for that book. And it dawned on me that this is a type of travel writing. I read in travel writing. This is what I'm interested in. That's my home. So I found my home in travel literature. That's where I belong. That's my story in a nutshell.
And we met a couple of years ago at Podcast Movement and share this love of travel. And we're both, with my books and travel show and your podcast, we're kind of working towards our own travel memoir.
Right.
But I mean, as we speak, the pandemic goes on. And I mean, we're both passionate about travel. What do you think drives our desire to travel, and how can traveling help our writing regardless of genre? I mean, you mentioned setting a bit there, but maybe go a bit deeper on that.
Yeah, I think travel springs from deep within us. Movement, migration are part of the human experience now. It's in our DNA. We have legs, right? We walk. And I think the modern travel industry plays off these instincts a little bit, I guess. I don't know, movement is a necessity. People, follow food, right? They follow the herds, and maybe people move for spiritual or economic necessities and reasons. But I'm not sure that that's travel. When those needs are met, I think what drives our desire to travel is adventure or curiosity or boredom or marketing agencies or something like that. I can speak for myself here, but what drives me and my desire to travel is a little bit of curiosity and I think a little bit of restlessness. You talk about from time to time, Jo, about refilling the creative well. And like you, I think I need routine, but I also need to break away from the familiar, because I need to be inspired, and traveling exposes us to new people and places and things. And I think it's cliche to say this, but travel can be transformative and inspirational. So you asked about how can this help with writing? People say write what you know. And I think the curious traveler knows a little bit more, right? Travel can expose us to new ideas and experiences and settings and situations, places and character. Can renew our energy to write and live. So I think it's inspirational, transformative. It exposes us to much more.
And so let's get into the different types of travel books and travel writing, because on your podcast, Travel Writing World, you've interviewed loads of very famous travel writers. And of course, I talk to a lot of people too, and we both read a lot. Yeah. So what are the different subgenres within the sort of broad phrase of travel? Because it's not just one thing, is it?
Right. Yeah, I've tried to break it down, the travel genre, the travel writing genre, into kind of different subgenres. And I'm not sure that that's the right term, but let's go with it. Subgenres or frameworks or, I don't know, styles. They're different ones. And I think part of the reason why I did this was because me, and I'm assuming other people too, we tend to conflate travel book and travel memoir, as this one thing. And if you read a lot of travel literature, you'll understand that there's much more diversity in terms of the styles of the books. So many people think of a travel log when they think of travel book or travel memoir, but I think they're distinct things. So Subgenres. Okay, so there are many, and I've listed out maybe like 10 or something on a post on my website. So one of the main examples is what I like to call the quest or the mission. It's a subgenre of travel book where, the author, subject, traveler, he or she goes off in search of something or to go somewhere, right? There's an external motivating factor for the narrative or the book. And one of the kind of common or most recent examples of this is a book by Sophie Roberts called The Lost Pianos of Siberia. And in this book, Sophie travels throughout Siberia looking for an old piano for one of her friends. She's a Mongolian musician. So kind of the inciting incident here of this book is that Sophie is looking for a piano in Siberia. But this kind of springs the book from this, the book branches out into Russian history, Siberian history, music history. So, from this quest, the book becomes something bigger or more meaningful than just the quest itself. So the quest is one of the styles. Another one I like to call the journey. And this is a style of travel book where it's like the quest, but instead of searching for something external to the author, subject, writer, that person is searching for something within. So it's a book more about like self-discovery than external discovery, if that makes any sense. And I conflate this with a travel memoir. So for me, like the word memoir comes loaded with a lot of connotations. Like I think of a memoir as an intimate book, a book that deals with some kind of psychodrama. There's an intimacy there. Memoir has a particular tone to it. And for me, a travel memoir has the same tone of a memoir, but it's set within the context of a travel experience. And so when the book is about kind of self-transformation or self-discovery, this is what I think of a memoir, travel memoir. And this is my term for this is the journey. It's just a term to describe the same thing.
And I mean, an example there would be, I guess, the Wild by Cheryl Strayed, or sort of an Eat, Pray, Love.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is a travel element, but is a journey structure.
Right. Yeah, it's 3-part. Right. It's nice in the title itself. It's a 3-part. Eat, Pray, Love. Another great example of this is Peter Matheson's The Snow Leopard. And on the surface, it's about him he and a friend are trying to spot one of these elusive snow leopards, but it's a book that's much more than that, right? There's an inner journey element to the book. Another one is what I like to call the mode or the method. And this is a type of travel book where the method of travel is front and center. So like walking travel books are really fashionable of late. And in these books, we expect the author to give us an account of what it's like to travel on foot, for example, or on train, or whatever the mode may be. But I guess like one of the things that we notice when we read in the genre is that these, like I like to delineate these subgenres nicely, but they're never really like that. I mean, the quest and the journey and the mode, these subgenres are often blended together. The quest can have an element of walking, or the journey can have an element of the quest, or whatever. They're blended in together. I think what is central to all of those is setting, right? The place. Readers of travel books want to read about the experience of traveling someplace. They want a sense of place.
Yeah, which is clearly super important. I think what's kind of held me back for so long, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this. So I've been thinking about a travel memoir for many, many years. And the ones that are sort of the famous ones, I mean, here in the UK, there's a big one at the moment, The Salt Path. Well, it was a big one a year ago or the year before. It's won all kinds of awards here. And it's the journey of a couple walking the Southwest Coast Path, which is about 700 kilometers, something like that. So it's a really big walk, but they start off homeless and kind of dying, and then it's a transformation journey. And Eat, Pray, Love, she starts off divorced and miserable and changes her life, and then Wild is the same, this sort of miserable, my life is broken, I'm so unhappy, and then the journey is this transformation to happy. And I've been kind of stuck on this going, do you know, I'm very happily married, I'm happy with my career. It's not like I'm going on a journey to try and go from miserable to happy. And also, I'm not climbing Everest, so it's not one of those sort of just big journey things.
The adventure,
and so yeah, the sort of adventure book. And I feel like we maybe trap ourselves into thinking that it has to be from terrible place to, I'm fine again type of thing. What do you think about that emotional journey in the travel book? Is it necessary?
I wouldn't say that it's necessary, but I mean, we're going back to this question of tone and intention here. Like, if it's part of your narrative, if it's part of your story, this kind of transformation, then yeah, have it be front and center. But like, I read many books, travel books that are kind of travel logs, where kind of the inner transformation or the inner journey isn't as front and center as it would be in kind of the journey or travel memoir type books, if that makes any sense. And that's totally fine. But, some of the rewarding travel books, indeed famous ones, are ones that have a kind of an element of inner transformation along with the kind of external journey.
And I think you can put the two within the same book, although it's so funny because
absolutely.
I when you say travel log, there's a sort of continuum, but on one end you've got the guidebook, which is this many miles from here to here, and this is the history of the oldest building, and this is where you should stay. I mean, that's a kind of guidebook. And then there's the middle ground of some discussion of the more emotional side, and then there's almost nothing to do with the practical elements along the way. So what are you thinking in terms of your travel writing?
Right. Well, so we didn't mention this earlier in terms of one of the subgenres, but one of my favorite subgenres of travel book is a subgenre that I call the big idea book. And this is a book where the writer has a big idea, and he or she travels to different parts of the world or different places to investigate that idea. So it doesn't have a kind of traditional narrative, not necessarily that we find in kind of like the quest or the journey narrative books. It doesn't have that arc necessarily. But the reason why I like it is because it deals with ideas, it's heady, it's a different type of book. So the type of things that I'm working on and that pull me, and the other books that pull me are these kind of big idea books. And a great example of this is McFarlane's Underland.
Brilliant book. One of my favorite books.
Yeah. So in this book, it's the idea of kind of subterranean spaces, and the author goes to different subterranean spaces broadly defined around the world. And so that's really interesting to me. Another great book, I don't know if you've heard of this one, is Cal Flynn's Islands of Abandonment. Have you heard of that one?
I have heard that. Someone's recommended that one. I haven't read it.
Oh yeah, it's a great book. And so the author is, I think she lives in Orkney, but anyway, she exploring spaces around the world that have been abandoned by humans. It's like a fascinating premise for a travel book, but necessarily she bounces around to different places investigating this idea of human abandonment, right? That's an awesome travel book, right?
Oh, I've got another one for you. Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. It's something like Travels in Search of a Good Death by Caitlin Doughty. And it's all about death culture in different places.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah. So I like this big idea travel book. And I think, with people listening, I mean, you and I are total geeks in the travel genre, but it's like travel is a word. I mean, you could say Underland actually fits within the nature writing niche.
Right. Mm-hmm.
As much as it fits. And in fact, he's probably more, maybe they put that in travel because he has written a lot more travel books, but actually it could be in geology, it could be in geography, in that way. So I think to encourage people listening, and what I've found, I think in the interviews I've done for Books and Travel Podcast, is that I've learned more about these structures, and it's helped me think, what kind of structure do I want to write? Could I write? And in that way, in fact, I've just been thinking about this, is that I've got one kind of memoir in my head, but also I'm thinking I want to write a sort of more list type book around English pilgrimages, which would contain a lot more practical stuff that I don't really want to put in a memoir. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I want to circle back here about something that you said about McFarlane's book being more nature writing. And so this is like one of the things that people have been talking about lately is that travel writing is, I don't know if being absorbed is the right word, but there's a conflation between travel writing and nature writing. Which one is it? And it can be both, and that's fine. When you think about travel writing, it doesn't always need to like deal with trains and planes and automobiles, right? It doesn't always need to deal with culture. It can deal with nature or other frameworks, right? I think that one of the beauties of travel writing is that it can be it's like chameleon-like. It takes on different forms. It's forever changing and transforming. It's a wonderful space to be in. But back to this other point about the English pilgrimage idea that you have. And so I think those would be like more service-oriented type of travel books, like the guidebooks that you mentioned earlier. And of course, like personal narrative can be sprinkled into it, but it's fundamentally a different type of book, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, just practical things where you find things out. And I think because I come from my nonfiction genres for is self-help, and I have a very self-helpy, I want to help people make the journeys in a way that is useful, but those things don't fit within a memoir. So what's hilarious is it looks like at the moment what I thought was one book is turning into 2 or 3 different things, and I'm putting different things in different Scrivener projects.
That's great.
Yeah, which is really interesting. So we've talked about a lot of the things there that we like in travel books, but again, we both read a lot of them. What do you think are some of the common weaknesses that will bring a book down in some way, and any thoughts on fixing those?
Okay, so I get it. I'm just speaking from personal preference here, but what I find to be one of the main weaknesses in travel writing is kind of the over-reliance on the travelogue. And by that, I mean like books that are just step-by-step accounts of a vacation without any story or substance. Like, it's like one croissant or bad hotel after another. It gets tedious a little bit for me personally. I know some people who love that style, but personally, I don't. One of the things I think it's helpful here is to think about, and we're going to go into like nerdland here for a minute, but I think it's helpful to think about like the definitions of like vacation and travel, or the etymology of these words, because vacation. Think about that word. It means like vacuum. It means empty, right? It means like emptiness in some ways. And I think this might be interesting to you, Joe, but there's one of the earliest examples of this word in the English language is in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, and it deals with the wife of Bath. And I know you live in
I live in Bath. I am a wife in Bath.
One of her husbands, I think he's a misogynist and gets pushed into a fire, but he's reading the Book of Wicked Wives, and they mentioned something about he's reading this book when he had leisure and vacation from worldly occupation. So like vacation literally is defined in the opposition of work, right? When someone is not working. Whereas in travel, travel literally means work. It means difficulty. It means burden, right? In French, travailler means work. So these are opposing ideas. Narratives about leisure without tension or complication or burdens or difficulties are sometimes boring to read. But narratives with some sort of work involved, personal work, personal struggle of a memoir, or summiting Mount Everest or whatever, or books that take a great deal of time and work to craft and write. Sometimes those are a little bit more interesting to me. So weaknesses, I think, is just like this, step-by-step croissant, account. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I totally know what you mean. But it's so funny because I'm not going to say the name of this, but when I had eye operation, like laser eye surgery a few years back, and of course you can't open your eyes for a few days, and so I listened to a lot of audiobooks, and in fact, again, when I had COVID recently, I do listen to those travel log step day by day. I got up and this was my view, and then I walked. These are all walking kind of things. I walk from here to here because while I'm in bed and can't do anything, I like to hear the step by step journey and try and imagine
looking out at the sea or whatever. And I don't really want to have the emotional angst side of it. And then once I'm fine again, I like the deeper, more meaningful memoir-y thoughts. But I agree with you in terms of the poorest travel books, I think, are the ones where they haven't edited for theme or metaphor or meaning, or like, I think the worst travel book could probably be made better by a good edit and cutting out just a lot of the extraneous stuff, and then and as I said, editing for theme or meaning or something like that, because every single travel experience could have that, could it? Couldn't it?
Right. Yeah, I know what you mean. Like it gets tedious to read about, how a beer was the most delicious beer someone has ever had. But that's not I don't want to like poo-poo the idea as you're mentioning here. I mean, if someone wants to write a travel log, if they're compelled to write one, that's a completely legitimate creative outlet, right? Writing about your travels, like, I get it, and that's fine. But I think a lot of good can come from thinking about story and thinking about structure and thinking about point and editing for story and trying to craft together something that's interesting for someone else to read.
No, absolutely. Yes, because I'm going through a lot of my journals at the moment from various things, and my journals are written for me. They're not full of things that are interesting for other people. But when I'm thinking about putting them into the travel book, I need to expand those and make them more travel-y. And actually, this is something I'm going to wanted to ask you, because you've got this interesting podcast, Sonus, Loci, The Sound of Place. And what we need in, I think, a good travel book, like we mentioned, Underland, sensory detail is critical in bringing a book alive, especially when it's an environment where you can't even really imagine what it might feel like. So what is your fascination with sound, and how do we bring in these sort of sensory details into our writing?
Yeah, so thanks for mentioning that other podcast, Sonus Loci. We Americans pronounce it Loci, but it's Loci. It's basically it's a podcast for me where I publish soundscapes from travel. I have these cool binaural microphones, and they go in my ear as if they were earphones, but they're not earphones. They're recording sounds as naturally as possible. And so I started to do this so I could just force myself to slow down and pay attention to the world a little bit more. Like one of my I live in Florida, not so far from the beach, and one of my pet peeves is, when people go to the beach, they bring their radios, and it seems like they do whatever it takes to pull them away from the space that they're in. Like, I get it. Like, I love to jam to tunes, but I found that the silence that people, dislike isn't really silent at all. It's filled with sounds, and I don't know. It's a podcast where it's an exercise in paying attention for me. But sounds, like everything else, I think they're like the raw data for the writer, just like any other sensation. And I think sound is really tricky to write about. I think the point or the trick is to not overuse it, but to sprinkle it in along with the other senses to give a full portrait of a place. You know what I'm saying? I think sound is a way to give life and credibility and texture to the writing. And as I think you can agree, it seems to be missing in a lot of writing.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I find smell, I find very difficult, and again can be super overused. And it is difficult because often the word that you come up with is kind of the same word. And if you want to explain it without using the same word, it has to be different. But I also think you can do sound through action. So for example, Jeremy Put the Kettle On, to me, does bring sound into the writing, because we all know what a kettle boiling sounds like. Yeah, so it's almost suggested, rather than here in Bath, people don't we're inland, but we have really noisy seagulls down by the Abbey, and this is a very unusual thing in this area. And so if I was writing about Bath, saying the sound of seagulls, whatever, playing with the rubbish at 4 a.m. it is actually a unique sound for this area, which makes it more interesting than mentioning maybe the seagulls by the sea. I don't know. Difficult.
No, it is difficult. And you're right. You're completely right. People can suggest sounds by writing about things in the environment, but people could also use onomatopoeia to great effect in the story, or describe things like the rattle and the hissing and the gurgling of things. And the trick again is not to overuse it, but I mean, how great can sounds be? Sounds are so important to travel. Like going to like a country in the Middle East or North Africa, and you hear like the morning call to prayer, the morning muezzin, and that can. You don't need to mention that every day of your travelogue or every day of your book for whatever genre you're writing about. But by mentioning that is something that can transport you into the place, right? And you don't need to reinforce this all the time, but you can just mention the muezzin calling or the prayer hour or whatever, right? So suggesting the sound, I think, is a good way about.
Yeah, definitely. I find it so interesting. And often as I'm writing things, I'm going back to places. And it's so great now. I can go back to a place on Google Earth to have a look, or I can go on YouTube and I can probably find a video of some street I've like a souk in the Middle East. And you can pick up things that you didn't pick up the first time. And I mean, like I do personally, I read a lot of travel books to sort of mine them for ideas for my own writing, as we do with any genre. And how things are described. I mean, like Underland, I've got in ebook and hardback and audiobook. And I just listened to it. But I did want to ask you, because I feel like we both are suffering from this, and which is a little bit of imposter syndrome around travel writing, because we have both read and both read and talk to people who write what is frankly award-winning literature. Yeah. And I always feel like it's how I felt before I wrote my first thriller, which is, I'm only allowed to write a book if it wins a prize, or some kind of famous publisher publishes it. So right. How do you feel about the imposter syndrome of the travel niche?
I feel it very strongly. Now, part of the tension I think that you and I both feel here is we want to write about our experiences, but we also want to write something that's good and meaningful for other people. And sometimes that can get in the way of execution, or actually writing the darn book, right? Just the analysis paralysis, or the imposter syndrome kind of stopping us in our tracks and preventing us from doing the work of actually writing, because we're interested in the prize or the attention or whatever fantasy we have in our minds about a book being good. And that is certainly something that gets in my way. And part of the other issue here with travel writing, Joe, is that I'm sure you'll understand this, is that travel writing is a broad genre that we see a lot of it in kind of print publications and that type of media, like for journalists. And that world is lock and key behind gatekeepers, right? You have to pitch to publications and editors, and most of the time they reject your work. So travel writers are kind of bombarded with rejection on a daily basis almost. And that can be humiliating in some ways. It can make us feel like we're not up to snuff or writing good quality work, whatever that means. So it's something that I think travel writers feel, very strongly about. What do you think about that?
Yes, no, I definitely struggle, but I'm getting to the point where I want to do it. And I think the pandemic's helped in terms of, I always say memento mori, remember you're going to die, but I've definitely felt it more this year. When I lay in my bed with COVID, I was like, I'll be so annoyed if I die right now. And I have a few books that I want to write before I die. And I'm like, I should just get on with that. And like Walking the Camino, I've wanted to do that for so long. And it's time to stop putting it off. And, perfect is the enemy of good. And the other thing is, I think, is the acknowledgement, and I've learned this from memoir writers too, is that one memoir does not need to be the only one. And I think for you and for me, we love travel and writing, this first travel book doesn't need to be the last travel book. So it doesn't need to be the book that represents your entire, life. And in fact, coming back to Macfarlane again with Underland, he's written a ton of other books, but that one seems to have hit a chord with so many people, and perhaps because it's quite different. But so how are you going to get over this? Because I clearly want to interview you on the Books and Travel Show about your travel book.
Well, so I think like many of us, the pandemic, proved to be complicated. It gave me some complications in my plans. In fact, right now I'm supposed to be in China. Like I've had this sabbatical thing. So what I'm doing to get on, I still have, like you, many ideas kind of swirling around. I have many different Scrivener projects. So there's always forward movement on one project or another. But what I'm doing to divide my time now is research. And, just for the type of travel books that I like, these big idea books, they're rooted in research and history. So I've been trying to do some of that, or most of that now while I'm stuck at home and not traveling. So like I'm kind of deep in it with research and history, and in fact language study as well, because I was supposed to go to China, so I'm studying a little bit of Chinese to help me with that. So there are things that you can do, I think, to bide the time, and when you can't travel because of pandemic or whatever reason, you can do research for the book that's swirling in your mind, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think practice. So I've been doing, solo shows. In fact, I was writing this morning. I've got an episode on London, which is incredibly hard to boil down London to one solo podcast episode. But it's almost like I'm practicing for the travel book. So yeah, I think that's good too. And in fact, I did want to just a final question around podcasting, because both of us obviously have travel podcasts. So do you think that podcast interviews help sell books? And if people do write travel, what are your tips in pitching? Because we both get a lot of pitches, obviously.
Short answer is yes. I just want to circle back if we have the time to talk about this idea of practice that you mentioned. I'm not avoiding.
Yeah, no, go for that.
I know the idea of practice. I think that's an excellent point to bring up, because you don't need to be somewhere exotic or whatever to practice writing or doing the work. When I go for my walks, I bring my recorder with me, and I'm recording sounds, of course, but I'm also dictating the experience of what it's like to be in a place. Right. And that can be a form of practice, right? A form of practice of dictation, but also a practice of observation. Kind of placemaking is so important to travel books. And if you're not paying attention to what a place is like, and you're not practicing describing or communicating that sensation to other people, then perhaps you're not doing a travel book, right? I mean, that's such a core element to the travel writing experience, that it serves you, I think, good to practice on a daily basis or whenever you can. So interviewing and pitching, yeah, absolutely. Podcasts sell books, right? It's like part of the machinery of marketing, right? In fact, our podcasts are part of this machinery too, like in terms of content marketing, right? But also more importantly for the guests, right? This is exposure marketing. It certainly helps sell books. And how or why, like, I think it's a good example. You often talk about, Joe, when you were in, I think, Australia, and you self-published your first book, and I think you had the books in your garage, and you went on all of the news outlets, and you were talking to people on the radio stations, trying to pitch and promote your book. But those audiences have such a kind of vast listenership, or such a wide audience, that a very small percentage of those listeners will actually have any pre-existing interest in the subject that you're talking about. But if you come on your podcast, Books and Travel, or my podcast, Travel Writing World, to talk about your travel book, 100% of those listeners will be interested in the subject, right? So yeah, absolutely. It's like a dedicated audience built in and interested in your work. And absolutely, it's going to help sell books. But in terms of pitching, yeah, I'm sure you get it a lot. Like, hey, I published a book. I'm available to be interviewed. That's probably not the good way to do it. For me, I don't know about you. I like emails that spell out as much as possible, like potential topics, links to the author's website and books, just as much information as possible so that we're not kind of doing extra work to dig around and do research. You're busy, I'm busy. As much help as possible in that email is tremendous help. It's tremendous help. What do you think about that?
Yeah. And I mean, especially because our travel podcasts are not monetized, either of us.
Right.
And so I have to spend time and money and energy on that podcast. So, the more you can give me in a pitch, the better. And in fact, someone needs to have listened or understand a bit about us, our characters or whatever, or what we're interested in. So for my books and travel, it better be an angle that I haven't covered. Like I've just had like 6 pitches for Portugal in a row, and I've done several episodes.
After your Portugal episode?
Yeah, after my Portugal episode. And I'm like, well, could you pitch me again in a year? Because I've already done 2 on Portugal and I'd really like some other things. Whereas one lady, he pitched me about Djibouti in Africa. And I was like, okay, yeah, totally. You don't even need to say anything more than I want to talk about Djibouti. And I'm like, yes.
You had me at Djibouti. Yeah.
Because most people won't be able to find that on a map, and that's cool.
Yeah, no, I totally know what you mean. So like in my podcast, one of my kind of angles is that we talk about the books, but we also talk about the business and the craft side of travel writing. And the pitches that kind of don't address that part of the show, it doesn't mean that they haven't listened to the show, but maybe they don't understand like what the show is trying to do. But the pitches that do have that element in them show me that the person that's pitching actually like listens and gets what's going on, and those rise to the top in terms of priority.
Yeah, exactly. Because at the end of the day, we're doing this because we are passionate about it and love it. And we want to just have a good conversation with people. And also, you mentioned curiosity earlier. It is about curiosity. And I come away going, oh, yeah, that was really cool. I want to visit that place and read those books. And that's just awesome.
Yeah, totally.
It is good. Right. Well, we could talk about this forever, but tell people where they can find you and everything you do online.
Well, the best place to go is my personal website. It's my first and last name. So Jeremy Bassetti, B as in boy, ASSETTI.com. Or if that's too hard to remember, my website, travelwritingworld.com, has links to everything there as well. You can find me on Twitter, on Instagram. I'm in all the places, but I think jeremybassetti.com or travelwritingworld.com will be the best place.
Fantastic. And you have a really good freebie on Travel Writing World. And I was saying to you before we started recording, you should publish that. So people should go get that for free at Travel Writing World. Okay, well, thanks so much for your time, Jeremy. That was great.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
So I hope you found the interview with Jeremy interesting, and even if you don't want to write in the travel genre, that we gave you food for thought about possible imposter syndrome and maybe breaking through to write something as a run-up to whatever is the real book of your heart and the one that's up there as super important. So next week I'm talking about writing and producing audio drama and podcast fiction with Sarah Werner. We have an interesting chat about the lines between podcasts, audiobooks, audio dramas and other audio projects, the challenges of writing for audio drama and the various elements you need from actors to sound effects and where to find them. So having given up on screenplays personally, I am still very interested in writing a fiction project for audio at some point. So I hope you will also find the discussion interesting. So happy writing, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You might also like the backlist episodes and show notes available at thecreativepenn.com/podcast. You can also get your free author blueprint at thecreativepenn.com/blueprint. If you'd like to connect, you can tweet me at The Creative Penn or find me on Facebook at The Creative Penn. See you next time.